Wisdom from Dads, Episode 4. I am Mark Ekdahl. Here is my wife, Natalie, and our kids. There's Aurora, who's 13, Tahoe, who's 3, and baby Jet, who's just 9 months old. We are here today to have some fun, hopefully have some crazy laughs, and many shared heartfelt moments. You will hear enchanting stories told by people just like you, mostly dads, but also some men and even women who are not dads. Today we have Nick Pavlidis of Confessions from a Terrible Husband. Nick has a book and a podcast about Confessions of a Terrible Husband. Let's hop right in and hear his interview. So Confessions of a Terrible Husband, what initiated, what was your core realization that something needed to change, and what have you seen since then that's impacted your marriage?
Well, it all started with this sense of discomfort, and it started probably in 2012 or so, where my wife and I, for years, we had been on different pages, and that's what at least that's how I perceived it. We were on two different pages. She didn't get, in my mind, what it took to work, to take care of. At that point, it turned into 4 mouths to feed. We were just on two different planes. I was working my tail off. I was a lawyer working up on the 31st floor, corner office overlooking Central Park in New York City. You would think that I had everything going for me if you just looked from the outside. But in the inside, it was just really, really uncomfortable. The pressure or the discomfort was because of the connection that I did not have with my wife, because my priorities were all out of whack, and because I kept pushing and pushing and talking instead of listening to her, and finding that most of what we wanted really was the same. We wanted the same things in life, just we weren't talking about it with each other. So Dan and Joanne, they just danced. Dan would talk and Joanne would add to the story, not just the substance, but the flavor around the conversation. She knew so much about coaching. She knew so much about building a business around family. And she just sat there and added so much depth to the conversation. You could just feel how much love Dan and Joanne had for each other. And that's what my discomfort was, because we loved each other, my wife and I did, but just the way they expressed each other, love to each other, the patience, the posture, the tone of voice, everything was just so loving. And I knew at that moment that that's when I had a new direction. And that's where I decided to strip myself down, really tear myself apart and examine what I did every day, the little things that I could change relatively simply, perhaps not easily, but simply to point my relationship in a different direction.
It sounds like underneath where you're at, you had a deep desire to connect with your wife that was continuing to go unfulfilled, and you didn't know what to do about it. And so it was your ongoing frustration that there was something there in that connection that you wanted to be different, and you didn't know what path to take for that. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't have the information. I had access to the information. We all had plenty of access to the information, so much information, but I was uncomfortable. I wanted a better connection at home, but for so many years it was, if only my wife would understand that this is what you need to do to take care of a family. This is New York City. You can't make $35,000 a year and take care of a family of 4. If we want her to be able to stay home with the kids, and if we want, this is what you got to do. That was my mindset. It was pushing back. It was everything you just don't understand. Things like that. Not talking down to her, but just frustrating. Like, I'm working so hard. And when I went down there, I got this clarity that, you know what, all of that stuff, even if my wife isn't an attorney, so she's never worked in a law firm, but she worked in really high stress situations. She knows what it's like to be stressed at work. She might not know the demands of feeling the pressure of taking care of 4 mouths to feed or things like that. But she understood the nature of wanting to take care of your family. And it wasn't until I went down to Nashville where I started watching, and there was never this moment between Dan and Joanne where Dan said, yeah, but Joanne, it was always very you could feel that each of them would take personal responsibility. You could just over what they could do in the conversation to lead to a different direction. It wasn't okay, if there was an interruption, it was nothing that was just contentious. So I just, for some reason, watching how they related with each other, I started saying, you know what? I've been doing this backwards. I've been pushing, trying to get the world to change around me, instead of looking inward and saying, well, what changes can I make? Because I know that stuff I can control. So being down in Franklin and in that room for 2 days, it flipped my process more than really anything. It wasn't the substance of the information. It was observing. It was watching how they acted. Yes, there's some substance there. But then I said, well, look how he's acting. What can I change about how I act to perhaps make things better? Because that was the only thing I could know that I could change is what I put into the relationship.
So what could you see that was different?
He was patient. First thing, way more patient than I was. And it wasn't that Joanne was interrupting, or being rude or anything like that. But Joanne would tell a story. She would complete every sentence. There was no interruptions. Dan wasn't just, you could tell he was watching her as she talked lovingly and not just waiting for her to stop talking so he could continue to present. He waited every time she spoke. There were 2 or 3 seconds of silence afterwards with Dan smiling, saying, agreeing or adding to it or something like that afterwards. There was never this rushed feeling like, okay, that's great, honey, or anything like that. With me back home, my wife couldn't finish a sentence. I mean, I couldn't finish a sentence sometimes because we were just on the complete different page. We were having conversations where we both weren't listening. We were just waiting for the other person to stop talking so we could continue with the last point we tried to make. So it was really the way that he really honored her, respected her, and valued her contributions.
So you also did something which is totally unconventional. You started a podcast holding yourself accountable more or less on the air for being a better husband. So tell me about your wife's reaction to you going on air and having a podcast and what it's meant for her that now you're committing on air with publicly to work on all this.
Yeah, well, it started with the book. I wrote a book, Confessions of a Terrible Husband, Lessons Learned from a Lumpy Couch, and that comes out June 2015. So as we're recording it here at the beginning of June, it comes out later this month. My wife, she has 2 reactions. One is she knows I talk about me. She knows I don't point fingers at her. Nobody's perfect, but she's comfortable and confident that I'm talking about things that I screw up on. So it's all about me and taking personal accountability over improving relationship. So that's the one thing. I guess it's 3 things. So one thing is that. The second thing is she appreciates that I'm continuing to work on it. She knows that I'm still not perfect and I still screw up all the time, but she knows I'm working on it. She really does appreciate that. And the third thing is she just laughs at me. She has no interest in being on a microphone. She does enjoy when folks will hire me to coach and say like, wow, she at first she's like, why would anyone want you to coach them? Like she knows that like from a business perspective and things like that, but she's like, your confessions of a terrible husband. People pay, like, what are you teaching them? How to be a terrible husband? And she's like, what would people think that you teach them? I said, she reads my stuff, so she gets it. She's sort of joking around. But yeah, she does like that I'm intentional. She really appreciates that I'm intentional about helping people. It's my nature. I enjoy connecting with folks and seeing what I could share with them, whether it's from a legal perspective or from a marriage perspective or something. That's just my nature. It has been for a while. So that is a quality that she has said she liked about me. But yeah, she has a lot of fun with it. She teases me about it from time to time, for sure.
That's great. So how can we find you and how can we support your book? I mean, you're up to great stuff. I would love for our audience to be able to support you both in your book and however else works for you.
Well, I appreciate that. The easiest way is to just go to aterriblehusband.com. That's the blog. Everything's there.
What a brave guy. Nick jumped in with 2 hands, 2 feet, and he looked at his marriage and what he could do to improve it. And then he wrote a book and a podcast about it, which the book is just now coming out. He was nice enough to give me a pre-release edition, which I read, and it was phenomenal. He was an excellent author. He kept me on my edge of my seat. He had some personal stories in there that were just riveting. I look for much more valuable content from Nick going forward. Thanks for being with us, Nick. Coming up next week, we will be talking about dating that I would love to share with you guys. Until next week.